Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedCommsNetworking.com for the global MedComms community. So people who work in and around MedComms, medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on. We're meeting online today during the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of us have been locked down for 4 months or more. Meetings and events activities have been disrupted massively with a rush to go virtual. Lots of questions remain about quite how this is all going to pan out. But today we wanted to just take stock of where we are, share some insights and thoughts about what's happening and what the future might hold. So in this session, we're going to talk about virtual meetings, planning virtual meetings, a focus on advisory board settings and meetings where external experts and HCPs are involved. And I'm delighted to be joined by Johanna Dixon and her panel of guests for what should be a very interesting discussion. And again, we've invited our online audience to send in comments, observations and questions. So panelists, can I ask you to introduce yourselves and I'll hand over to Johanna to lead the way. Thank you very much.
Great, well, thank you, Peter. I'm just going to share my screen first. As Peter said, today our session will be focused on virtual meetings, top tips and lessons learned. My name is Joanna Dixon. I'm a Managing Client Services Director with CMC Connect, which is part of McCann Health Group. We've tried to get a panel together of experts from pharma, also from AV and meeting specialists. I'm just trying to advance my slides and they're not advancing. I think we tested that a moment ago. Just bear with me a moment. I may need to just stop sharing for a moment and then I'll come back in. And I'll start sharing from the top again. Excellent, here we go. So if we move on to Katherine to introduce herself.
Hello everyone, I'm Katherine Baria. I'm a Global Medical Affairs Leader at AstraZeneca.
And then Ged.
I am Ged Forshaw, an account director with APS Events and Media.
And I'm Orla Weir, I'm Multi-Channel Strategy Director at CMC Connect.
Great, so in terms of what we plan to cover today, really we want to try and provide some really practical tips with regards to the what, the how and the technology considerations when planning virtual advisory board meetings, virtual training meetings, and also those higher end broadcast meetings, which I think will be really beginning to grow over the coming months. As Peter said, please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A filter for any questions that you might have, and we'll make sure that we look at those and pose that to the panel. We'll have time for a moderated Q&A at the end, so do please engage with us and ask as many questions as you like throughout. With that, I'm actually going to hand you over to Katherine, who's going to start off with virtual advisory boards.
Okay, so yes, so today we're going to talk about the virtual advisory boards. All the usual criteria for an advisory board, such as clear objectives and emphasis on discussion and compliance requirements, obviously still remain. So what's different for a virtual advisory board? Firstly, you need to keep people engaged and discussion is often slower, so it may be worth planning a shorter meeting. And this will also help with point 3 on this list here, which is finding a time that works across global time zones, because that can be quite a challenge. Between the west coast of the US and Asia, there's between 15 and 16-hour time difference. Online engagement can be difficult to ensure, so we definitely recommend a smaller group. For highly discussive meetings, it also means that you don't get people trying to talk over each other, which can be quite a challenge, particularly if there's a slight lag in the sound. One potential advantage of these meetings is that you don't need to book a physical meeting room either at a congress or need to book flights to fly people in. So you have some more flexibility. They can be quicker to organise. They can be cheaper when you're not paying for all of that meeting space and AV equipment on site. So during the meeting, define upfront how you're going to have the interaction. Are you going to allow people to interrupt the presenters? Will you be using the chat function? And if so, is someone going to be monitoring it to make sure that those points get pulled into the discussion? Are you going to be using the raise hand function, which is really useful if you do have a bigger meeting, to make sure that people aren't talking around each other, make sure that people are aware that it's there and you will be using it. Definitely mandate video from all of the active participants, and make sure that the chair knows who's there so they can call on the advisors that are slow to engage. Some platforms will show videos of everyone who's there, some platforms won't, so it's really important to make sure you call on people. Make use of the private chat function as well. It's not as easy to just sort of signal to people to pick up on small issues. So, make sure that the chairs and agency team members and the technical support all have a way of communicating either through the platform you're using for the meeting or another platform. Again, another advantage is that there is the possibility of having silent observers who are not on video and are not on microphone, and they can just watch what's happening, either because it's useful for them in their work or possibly as a training activity. Obviously, check compliance requirements with that. And then finally, some technology considerations. There's quite a lot on this slide, and I think we'll cover some things more in detail later. But if you have a shorter meeting, you're going to want to get started quickly. So there's a few things you can do. If you use a platform that people are familiar with, you can usually dive right in. You don't need to do any training or familiarization. And something that we did recently was actually to put the housekeeping slides on a loop that was running before the meeting, so that we didn't have to spend a lot of time going through them during the meeting. It's always worth having A/B checks with the presenters on the actual platform that you will be using, so that they are comfortable with it and you're sure that it works. And also have a backup presenter. It's definitely happened to me recently where everything was fine and then the presenter couldn't get on the meeting on the day. It sounds like an obvious one, but have someone dedicated to manage ongoing AV issues, muting non-speakers, managing sound quality, controlling the slides. It's really easy to lose engagement from people when these problems arise during a meeting. And finally, these meetings are often recorded, so make sure everyone's aware and everyone consents both to the video and the audio recording. With that, I think I'm going to hand over to Orla.
Yes, so the big difference between virtual training meetings and ad boards is that with ad boards, you're trying to elicit information from the delegates. With training meetings, you're trying to impart knowledge to them and ensure that they engage in that knowledge sharing and can conduct various activities as a result of participating in the training program. So next slide, Joanna. So as always, you really need to set out your clear learning objectives, but not just the objectives, the desired outcomes for any training session. We would recommend between 20 and 200 meeting attendees, probably less than 200, but we have been in situations where more people have actually turned up at the meeting. So we've ended up with more than 200 people. And I think it's really important just to bear that in mind, that when you have a virtual meeting, not everybody registers, but they may just pitch up on the day. So you need to ensure that your technology will actually support a number greater than the number that you estimate will attend. We had a situation recently where we were expecting about 150, normally about 100 would attend the face-to-face, and we had over 200 who attended the actual meeting. Now that was brilliant, apart from the fact that the technology being used did not support breakouts with greater than 200 people. So we had to pivot and be agile in the meeting. And I think that's a real learning as well. Just as with face-to-face meetings, you always have to have contingency plans in place, always expect the unexpected. In terms of formats, engagement is really key. And you've got to work at the engagement when it's virtual because everybody multitasks. So you've got to expect people to be multitasking and really take your job to ensure that they're going to stay on task and keep maintaining attention. We would recommend a combination of plenaries and breakouts. I've suggested here a split 40%, 60%. And the plenary really is for imparting the knowledge, and the breakouts are for applying the knowledge. Because we know that if people apply the knowledge at the time, they're much more likely to retain that information and be more comfortable using it moving forward. The content needs to cater for multiple learning styles. So I've indicated audio, auditory, kinesthetic, and visual that need to be catered for. although people might have a preference, actually having a good mixture of these different styles is very useful for all learners. And then particularly with kinesthetic learners, a high level of interactivity is required, and that's for both engagement but also to apply and reinforce the learning. Next slide. And I see there's a question here about breakouts in Zoom, so we'll talk about that in just a minute. When you're dealing with plenaries, I would certainly recommend having the audience muted and all the videos off other than the presenters. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is just the size of your screen real estate. You don't want too many videos on there. They'll be competing for screen real estate. The second one is bandwidth. People will struggle with bandwidth. And lastly, it's the distraction factor. So in a plenary, I'd certainly recommend having videos off and the audience muted. Think about the different formats for the presentation as well. Mix it up a bit, try and keep it interesting. So rather than just a didactic presentation, you can have the interview style, have a debate style, etc. Just think about how you are best going to impart the knowledge and also maintain some interest for the audience. And one way of doing that is just to have a variety of presenters, a variety of voices. It just makes it easier to pay attention when there's a mixture like that. And there's various pieces of interactivity that you can engage in. These are supported by most of the technologies now, raising your hand, asking a question through chat, polls, drag and drop, etc. But you can also have things like ChatStorm, where you pre-populate with questions and everybody has the ability to answer that question during the meeting. The one thing I would suggest is that you think about these formats and these interactivities in advance, and as much as possible pre-populate them into the system. So if you have a poll, have that poll set up the day before. So it's about planning, preparation, and being ready to go, and being ready to implement a backup as well. Quite often the technical providers want to have the show reel in advance. They want it 24 hours in advance. But then the presenters might turn around and say, actually, I've updated that slide now 15 minutes before the presentation. So you need to have a way of catering for that. And quite often it's a case of switching between different laptops. With breakouts, the function of the breakouts really is to apply the learning and to get a lot of hands-on interaction between the people who are in the breakout. I'd recommend going below 20 people, and 10 people is better in a breakout. So again, think about how big is your audience and how many breakouts are you likely to have. One of the things that is really useful is to have people already allocated to breakouts, and a lot of the technology, including Zoom, allow you to do that. So you can pre-allocate who's going into which breakout session and automatically move them into that breakout session. I would suggest you have a facilitator for each breakout session as well. They serve a couple of functions. One is just to welcome people into the breakout session so people know they're in the right one to start with. And secondly, it tees them up to initiate the activity, whatever that activity might be. And there's a whole lot of different ways that you can start applying the knowledge, and it really depends on what your learning objective is. But it might be that you have a solving a patient case study, or you might want to map a treatment journey, or even develop a script like an elevator pitch where you've got a very small, succinct way of communicating key messages. So it's a great way of seeing whether people have actually taken away the key points from the plenary session. Role plays are possible, but they just need a little bit more planning. So you can map out the script for a role play. You can even have 2 people who volunteer to act out that role play, either in the breakout or when you come back into the plenary session itself. And the various technologies that are available allow for different types of interactivity, shared whiteboards, work mats, etc. Now, with the shared interactivity, it's worthwhile, again, if you're going to use something like a whiteboard or drag and drop functionality or a work mat, plan those in advance and make sure they're uploaded in advance of the meeting and allocated to the right breakout session. If you are using something like a work mat where you're collating information from a lot of people, it's useful to nominate a scribe, so somebody who's going to capture that information and present it back It just makes it easier. Otherwise, it can be very messy with multiple people writing on a work mat at the same time. With a whiteboard, however, I think that can be useful, allowing everyone to write on it, because usually you're trying to capture quite a bit of information in one place. And the next slide. So the technology considerations. There was a question about Zoom. Now, one of the areas where Zoom is actually particularly good, I believe, is in breakouts. It's useful in a number of different ways. One is that Zoom supports quite a large number of people if you're going for Zoom webinar. A lot of people are familiar with Zoom now, and most people seem to be able to get into Zoom with very little trouble. There has been a concern, a security concern about Zoom, which the more recent release of Zoom seems to have allayed to a large extent, although I do know there are still some pharma who are a bit reluctant to use Zoom. On the other hand, we have other pharma clients who insist on using Zoom. So it's a good mix. We've also used Adobe Connect quite a lot. There's some nice plugins for Adobe Connect, like the sorting tool. You can see here, post-it notes, being able to add post-it notes, being able to sort things, being able to drag and drop things. That functionality is really quite nice. However, there's always been a concern about the audio quality within Adobe Connect. And also Adobe Connect supports up to 200 people. So if you're in that situation where you've got 210 people, you won't be able to have the breakouts. So it's really important to think about what your training session is going to look like, how many people are there, what level of interactivity, and what format you want, and choose the technology on that basis. Ease of use, functionality, and stability are key criteria to consider. The other thing I would mention is that with all these technologies now, one of the benefits, of course, is that you can record and have an on-demand session at the end of it. You can get in the stats, so you can see how many people have attended, what level of interactivity there was. You can capture the questions and the outputs, etc. in the plenary sessions. A lot of them will not allow you to record the breakout sessions, though. So if that's something that's important to you, you need to be planning for that in advance. And my last point is really that everyone is using virtual meetings now. Everyone's very familiar with it now. It's not new, but it does mean that a lot of bad behaviors are sneaking in, and in general, people are multitasking. So just assume the multitasking and assume you've got to be asking questions. So if I were spending a bit longer on this presentation with you, I would try to find the names of some of the participants and maybe ask questions, or have a poll in here or a drag and drop in here, just to try and get people engaging a little bit more. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Ged now, and Jed's going to take us through broadcast meetings.
Okay, if we can go to the first slide. The virtual world. So what I'm going to cover in this section is the large meeting, or the standalone meeting, as we would have done them in the live environment, if you like. I'm going to refer to a tag at the bottom of this slide, a place of endless possibilities, and we'll come back to that later on. So if we go to the next slide. So the webcast or broadcast is stepping up a level from what's just been discussed, and suitable for hundreds to many thousands of people. It really does replace that 1 day, 2 day standalone meeting. So usually, and in pre-COVID times, what we would do is we'd do a TV style production. So this is a one-to-many production, like switching on the TV. So what we typically do is send your speakers to a TV studio somewhere in the world, and we'd broadcast from there. So full HD quality, complete environment control, and allowing us to technically control the broadcast, vision mix, running videos. And just difference from the other systems is that full production control that you would see when you switch on the news or a sports program, etc. And this, like I say, when you've got 1,000, 1,500 people, you want to make sure that you're getting the message to them. So that's the way we did it before. Obviously, in current times, that's changed. Now what we have to do is manage the system in the same way. The broadcast stays the same, but we've got to manage the speakers in a different manner. So if we can just move on a slide. Speaker management. You can't underestimate how much of this. It's the most important part of the events. Without the speakers, you've got no show. And so therefore, it's a worrisome part, and from a technical point of view, and the weakest link, if you like. So if we don't put the time and effort into the speaker preparation, and most of all, connectivity, you don't have a show. We can't take them to the studio. Maybe that'll change in the coming months, and we can at least do that. And so we've been working closely with clients on this side events very closely, preparing document guides to aid the presenters' initial stages, best practice for setting up camera position, lighting, providing HD cams if required, headsets, and even green screen backdrops to up the production value. We further connect with presenters before the meetings and just walk them through the process. Can't stress so much that how much this time is important to the whole thing, because as was mentioned before, if you can't hear me, you can't see me, and my message is not getting across, well, people are going to lose interest, and that could be the end of the show. And a lot of money investment has gone into this. Whether we send out green screens or we just deal with backdrops and things just to declutter, have you locked the dog away, doorbells, people walking around in dressing gowns, it's all important. It should all be taken seriously when there's such an investment over these meetings. Pre-recorded materials has been a great way of dealing with this. So we're seeing this across all symposia, congresses, standalone meetings, doing the same process as we mentioned before, pre-recording the materials, getting the presenters online, talking them through the steps, but then we get the opportunity to edit the presentations, get them ready for show. And typically you're seeing this across congresses as well, where this is happening. Play the pre-recorded material, get them on, the speakers on for Q&A at the end, and it just takes a little bit of worry out of whether they're going to be disturbed on the day, let alone if they can connect via the internet. The internet is still a troublesome thing. We all experience it from time to time. So pre-records hopefully will mitigate that. So bespoke solutions, what typically happens when you're not using the Zooms and GoToMeetings and Adobe Connects and everything, you tailor a package, and this is usually seen in a event microsite that clients develop or we develop with clients, and you can push delegate registrations through here, pre-reads, tailor the whole package to the experience. Microsites, and allowing people to test their systems beforehand, have a technical person they can speak to along the way. And the idea is they turn up on the day and they just sit in their seat and they watch the presentation. Okay, so if you just move forward another slide, please. This is mentioned before, the microsite, and what we've seen in the past before is polling, surveys, ask a question functions. And if you move on again a slide, so what we're seeing now over the last 4 months is a real, very speedy evolution of this meeting, where clients are wanting to add in anything they can, wherever they can, over the period of the meeting to keep engagement. A lot of this is driven by the time expectation of how long someone will sit at their computer. I don't know about you, but I'm spending all my days on the computer speaking with colleagues, and the endurance of the delegates is changing, I think, and possibly you can push the time element as long as there's breaks. They can go off and they can converse or come back, comfort breaks, etc. So we're seeing the microsite, which I mentioned before, and then poster sessions, interactivity, gamification, live Q&A, translation, obviously, and so on and so forth. And breakouts as well. So people are trying to make not trying, they are, and it's good to encourage this, a hybrid of the meetings we mentioned before, along with this broadcast. So it's not just one-to-many anymore. It's evolving into, right, we've got breakout rooms and then chat rooms. People going off and being able to converse with fellow delegates as they would in the real-life environment. And we've seen this more and more, and obviously congresses I've been quite impressed by congresses over the last 4 months. They've been able to turn the physical into the virtual and trying to keep the experience going. If we can just move on a slide again. So we're even seeing in the Congress world and in the meeting space as well, not just the congresses and the day meetings, where we have marketplaces, interactive areas, and poster sessions that people can leave the main plenary room, go to a breakout room, then go off to a marketplace, view videos, view marketing elements, etc. And the one thing I would say about the whole of this, they are good to add, end clients are always pushing the boundaries and want to be one step ahead of the competition, but just use a little bit of caution on whether you should, because I've heard conversations where throughout a meeting they want to fit everything in. You possibly throw it, which is great, but it's got to work for the delegates, got to work for the flow of the meeting. Technically, if you can think of an idea, there's possibly going to be a way to deliver this, but just step back, take your time. And that's one thing I would say more than anything is consider the standalone meeting. You probably would not have designed this and delivered this within a few weeks. You would have taken this over months, in some cases even a year. So take the time in formulating what the plan is for the meeting, technically how you want to engage with the delegate, the duration of the event, then how the technology fits. And spend that time developing that, not just rushing at it for the sake of rushing at it and adding things on for the sake of adding it on. Delegates want to come in, as I say before, sit down, enjoy the experience, be engaged with the words, but also as well, the technology as well. Make it simple and just let them flow through. So we go to the next slide. So enduring materials, what the digital gives us more than anything is a constant pre-event materials. You can load your microsite up with pre-reads and quizzes and things they can do. You can deliver the event on the day, but then on demand. There's no end of possibilities of extending these meetings over the weeks, the months, and we're seeing this with ongoing campaigns throughout many clients in many areas. But the main thing, as I say, is plan. Sorry. No, that's fine. That's fine. So plan as you would a standalone event with a webcast, and especially if you're adding in a marketplace, especially if you've got breakout rooms. These are not off the shelf. As many of these platforms will try and make you believe, there's a lot of things going behind the scenes that you need to put in place to deliver this. So plan as you would a standalone event, make it engaging, but keep it simple, I should say as well. Don't underestimate the preparation, and don't overcomplicate the functionality, because not without giving yourself good lead time in doing so. And more than anything, I think spend the quality time on speaker preparation, because as I say, weakest link. Okay, thank you.
That's excellent. Thanks, Ged. So, well, thanks everybody for listening to our presentations. I think there's been some good questions that have already started coming through. So I'll stop sharing now so that we can have a more sort of formalised Q&A session, and you can see all our faces properly. I think we're all back on your screen. So yeah, we've got some good questions here. So I know there's quite a lot around sort of really breakouts, and obviously I think with meetings, you know, going to continue being in this virtual world, how to maximize those, how to best tips on moderating those. So I'm not sure if Orla, you have any additional points you'd like to make on that.
I would just say, if you're not going to have a facilitator in the breakout, then you need to have really clear instructions as to what you want them to do once they're in the breakout. Ideally, if you can allocate people to the breakout in advance, and just ask a couple of people if they will lead it. So they may not be official facilitators, but at least it's somebody who can guide the rest of the participants in that breakout group. And then the question on the languages. There is a big advantage actually from a language perspective if it's virtual, in that you can have you can provide some written verbiage as well to go with the audio and the video, and also you can have simultaneous translation as well. I think Ged might have more to say about that.
Yeah, we run various events with up to, and we're doing some at the minute, we've got about 8 or 9 different languages going on. So again, within your event site, people can go on. It could be tailored in their language on the word side of things, but also they can click on their flag and they can attend and they can hear this in simultaneous translation. Where this fits as a cost point of view when you've got a small meeting and breakouts is another question, but on the bigger meetings, it's something we're doing all the time now, yeah.
There's a question here on a kinesthetic learner. A kinesthetic learner is somebody who prefers to learn by doing. So they're the people who will be first to the whiteboard, first to the work mat, etc. They like applying it, and that's how they learn best, rather than by listening and just watching.
So there's quite an interesting question here from Malik in terms of really kind of what's the future going to be, and I think that's why partly we're having this session today. I mean, I'm sure, Ged, you've done quite a few of these bigger events of late. You know, do you think people are already getting tired of it?
It's hard to say. I think there's, like I say, I've been impressed by the speed of which people have moved into this world and been taken up. We've seen greater numbers in events that we've done in the past. 1,500 people, 2,000, jumped to 6,000 people. So it's taken on board. Longevity, what's going to happen at the end of this? We're not just attending these meetings, we're also being locked down in our homes as well, aren't we? So I think we'll probably see some return to standard meetings, and I know some people in September are still looking to do these, the optimists, but I think there's longevity in this meeting. It's been a push for 10 years. It's been a campaign for a lot of pharma companies to make these regional or hybrid meetings. So I think we're going to see a definitely more than we did in the previous. Whether it's all online, I doubt, but time will tell. I think the success and the metrics coming back from congresses is going to really be important to all this.
Great. And there was one question here just in terms of the practicalities. I'll post this to Katherine around the slide loop for an ad board, and you know how you make that work, or perhaps a bit more insight into what you might include there for that to be useful.
So, I mean, you're possibly the best person to answer the technical part, but certainly information's around that you want to keep everyone to have the video on, that it's going to be recorded, all of these key points that just take a little bit more time in the meeting. They can be really useful to have up on that slide loop. And then in terms of the loop itself.
Yeah, I mean, you just can program your PowerPoint so that it just starts flicking through. So just as you would actually if you were having the start of a symposium or the start of a virtual, not a virtual, a standalone event, and you have your slide loops, that's something which your technical team, your technical colleagues, presentation support colleagues should definitely know how to do. I personally haven't done it myself.
I think technically as well, you can take control. Peter at any point now can throw us all off if you like, so and mute everyone as it has done. So having that technical support, I think, is definitely, I mean, I would say that with technical company, but I think, just don't underestimate it sometimes. It depends on who you've got coming to your panel, throwing 10 people on, but when you jump up in scale and your breakouts and complexity, take the control back if you can and treat it as you would a meeting.
If there's another question around Zoom, and my understanding is, I think you have to set up the Zoom in a certain way or have a certain package to be able to do the breakout functionality. Is that correct, Ged? It's not.
Well, they worked on a lot of them work on a Zoom webinar would not allow breakouts, and a Zoom meeting will allow breakouts. And a lot of the platforms, they're all competing against each other, and you see this going on. Cybersecurity has been a massive one, as Orla mentioned before. And some people are just not willing to touch any certain platforms. But yeah, you've got to look at, we never push any one platform. We listen to what everyone should do. Listen to what you're trying to do, speak to someone technical who can give you advice, and then choose a platform that works for that meeting, rather than shoehorn your meeting into a platform.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the key points here. There's quite a few questions around sort of the translation piece, because obviously, I guess with things going virtual, then more people will be connecting from multiple different countries, etc. So does anybody have any top tips there, or anything they've experienced with really quick translation? I know, Ged, you mentioned 7 different languages, was it just a moment ago? Or?
Yeah, I think the main thing is with any of this is, and we run into this all the time, is the medical terms. As we know, when we do this in the real room, get the translators your medical terms early, do some pre-work with the translators so that they're saying the right things, basically. So some of these medical terms I couldn't repeat in English, never mind translating to Russian or Mandarin, as it may be. So spend the time on that beforehand, get that right, and then it should be an easy function. It's click on a button and then you're listening in your native language.
Excellent. So I guess the point is that you have to have prepared and brought in your translators and have that set up, and that's the way you can make it work.
All about the preparation, yeah.
And Katherine, actually, back to sort of the ad boards, it was a question actually I was going to ask myself if somebody didn't, which was, I know you did virtual meetings pre-COVID and you've done quite a lot now post-COVID. Any sort of key points there, or even in terms of engagement levels?
Yes, so I think a big surprise for me was, I think almost no one refused to come to the virtual ad board. So, you know, usually with a face-to-face ad board, you'd invite slightly more than you were thinking of having, because you'd expect a certain amount of dropout, and everybody said yes to the virtual ad board. And it even involved someone dialing in at 4 a.m. and they commented on it, and they still came. I've done a few things. I've tried to have one ad board globally. That worked quite well. I've also done an ad board sort of in two parts where I've split it to accommodate time zones. That was interesting. I think particularly if you've got experts in Asia who are not as forceful with sort of pushing their way into discussions online, that can be a really interesting way of doing it, particularly if it's important to really hear what they have to say if there's a difference in standard practice.
Excellent. And I think I'd also heard that sometimes people are finding that they actually can get their first wave of advisors, you know, their first choices. Sometimes it's very hard to get on their schedule, but actually you're getting your top pick often in one place, which obviously is great.
Also, you do risk some last minute dropouts. So if you're doing something, particularly if it falls into the middle of someone's clinic day, there's a risk that their clinic just overruns or is particularly busy, and you're going to get a message last minute to say they're not there. But generally engagement has been really high.
Excellent. And there's a few more questions coming in, I think, you know, really around the technology, Ged. Obviously, it's a hot topic. It's the bit that everybody gets a bit scared about. So I think questions around liability, you know, where does that lie? There's one from Jackie.
Reliability of
or liability.
Liability.
If things go wrong.
Well, that's why we do the pre-work beforehand. A lot of it, I mean, things do go wrong when you're playing with the internet, number one, as a service. But if you're creating platforms and you're adding things in at last minute, and we've experienced this as well, it's that preparation time and not trying to push too many things, as I mentioned before, at the delegates on the site. Just keep it simple. Try and deliver what you would have done in the meeting room, and then you can add the add-ons in. We'll take your time in producing these and preparation to everything. Liability, most of the issues that you see go wrong are coming from individuals. I can't connect. Then we have help desk behind the scenes, getting them on. A lot of it comes down to the individual viewers who are experiencing problems. But the website of it moves at such a colossal rate from week to week, month to month. Things change massively. So everything we talk about Zoom today is something else in 3 months' time, and there's a grand competition going on between them all. And I think liability as well with regards to, and this is a security issue, is people wouldn't use Zoom before because people could enter a Zoom call. Now they've worked around that, but you've got to realize that Zoom is their platform. It's someone else's platform. Same with Adobe Connect. You've got to be up to date with reading the cybersecurity, what they're putting in place to make this a secure event, and make your choices thereafter. And it's difficult for anyone, including ourselves, to say, yeah, we suggest this because of the cybersecurity. We suggest this because of functionality. You've got to personally look at the cybersecurity and does it fit? And it's a sensitive, we're in the most sensitive of the environments with the medical, aren't we, in most cases. So yes, due diligence is required on everyone's level.
So we've got, we're at sort of 22 the hour. So I'm not sure, Peter, from your perspective, there's quite a lot of questions that are still in the various different channels there. Anyone that you particularly would like to have raised from your perspective?
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, no, actually there is. And it's great, great discussion. Thank you very much, everybody. And we're loving the questions coming in and so on. But what I'm sitting here thinking, I would like, as you say, we're sort of near to finishing up. So I'd like to ask a very specific question. And as I was thinking about that, Jason's actually asked it, or essentially asked it. So I'd like to ask Katherine, but anyone else to comment. Fundamentally, and I don't know quite where you are on the line. So I know things like advisory board meetings have been moving digitally, moving virtually, but we've had a big kick in the last few months, and most people have suddenly been doing more than they were doing. With an advisory board meeting, by definition, a small group of experts, busy people, time poor, probably from all over the world, whatever. If I can put it like this, what is the justification for not doing it virtually in the future? Will you just do it virtually, or is there reason for not? Can I put it like that?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I don't know that we absolutely know how that will be. I think as everyone gets more and more comfortable with doing these meetings in a virtual platform, then probably you're right, we will move to them. It is more of a challenge to get that discussion going, to really see people interacting, because in a face-to-face, you might get a couple of people who have like a small conversation or sort of bounce off each other. That doesn't seem to happen as much in the virtual environment. It really depends on having a good chair, especially someone who knows the other people individually, to kind of stimulate discussion. That they do work well, they're absolutely fine. I would not say that they felt the energy has been much lower. They haven't felt as involved, but as people get more comfortable, maybe that will start to change. So
one of the arguments against it that's been put to me is that you can't really replace the relationship building that comes from being face to face. If you've maybe had a first advisory board meeting, we've all met each other, maybe subsequently it's easier and more effective to run it virtually, and economically it makes a lot of sense. And I sort of get that argument. But the economics must be quite overwhelming at times, isn't it?
It is quite a big difference, particularly if you're booking a meeting room at a congress. Those, as you can imagine, are at a premium.
But also, these people are a bit of time poor. So, you know, the sheer convenience of being able to dial in maybe for even a few hours, versus traveling for 3 days, sort of thing, with some of these people, you know, and there's a balance, isn't there? Because if it's so convenient, that the advantages then get outweighed of going somewhere. And I find it interesting. And I just wonder how, you know, we've all got different agendas, but, you know, those opinion leader types on a key advisory board meeting, are you getting any sense from them that that's the way they want to go? Are they pulling or pushing back, or what are they doing?
I think it's really dependent on your personality type. Some people, both in industry and experts, are really missing that face-to-face, those offline chats, the things when you catch people in the hallway, sense of things. They're missing, you know, all types of meetings face-to-face. Some people are finding them, like you say, really convenient. I'm not sure that the argument is really there that you can't build those relationships in a virtual environment. I actually moved to a whole new therapy area right at the beginning of COVID. But I would say that I'm still finding I can build those relationships. In some ways, it's preferable for me. Congresses were incredibly busy with a lot of meetings, not just planned meetings, but short meetings. And it was kind of a whirl of people, and now it's a bit more spread out. And I think you get people able to reflect a lot more. Maybe if you're discussing particular data, you can do it maybe 2 weeks after a congress, and people have had time to digest that data, to talk to people, to talk to their colleagues, maybe even to try out that drug. So I think there are advantages. It may mean we need to get better, all of us, at interacting online.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I think actually that was excellent. That covered off or raised several important points, which hopefully people will have a think about. Joanna, we sort of come to the end of our time. I mean, does anybody else want to add something just to wrap it up, or shall I wrap it up? Orla, you look like you want something.
Yeah, there was an interesting question there, and I haven't got an answer, but I think it's worth flagging up. Somebody's asked about virtual exhibitions and how successful they are. And from my perspective, the jury's out. I think virtual meetings are working well, but I'm not convinced that virtual exhibitions are working well. So trying to get the ROI on those, it will be challenging. And trying to do a like-for-like replacement, I'm not sure is working. So you really need to think about what's it that you want to communicate and what's the best way of doing that. And I think as these virtual exhibitions roll out over the course of the year, there'll be some good key learnings. I don't think we're fully there yet.
I think they're very tactile, aren't they? They're very tactile as you walk around the exhibition stand. A lot of them have been hands-on or interactive as well. So you taking that completely away. But I think, as Katherine said, Joanna said, it's people learning to do things differently online. We've been forced down this avenue, and it's worked very well for certain things. And I think people will, If it stays this way, they're going to have no option. They're going to have to adapt to actually proceed.
Right. Okay, guys, we could go in into a whole different presentation with exhibition stands and so on. So can I call a halt to it if you're happy? I'd like to finish by saying huge thank you to you guys for joining in, to all of you, and I hope you'll all be happy with me to say to the audience and anyone watching later on the video to reach out to you via LinkedIn and so on, and make the connections and follow up. So huge thank you, and Johanna for leading that. Thank you very, very much. I'm just going to say, for those of you watching the video, just to wrap this up, it's one of a series we recorded, MedComms Forum in July 2020. You'll find all those videos and much more at NetworkPharma TV or in the MedComms YouTube channel, so do check those out. So for the moment, I'm going to say a big thank you. Can we all just give a wave as I stop the recording and say bye?